all these talks, all the information we're going to go over. Amanda and I put together quite an agenda. We're really going to focus on some high-level things. Those who've seen recent talks will recall that there were a number of different topics, and we're really going to focus on the new regulations that have come in. In fact, if you look at the materials that got sent out, we for example didn't even reference that we were going to cover the OSHA ETS that is before the Supreme Court in the materials, but we're gonna. Man's looking at me like, please tell me you're going to cover it. Of course, we're going to cover it because I'm not sure there's an issue right now going on. But I did want to get you some recent updates, particularly from CDLE. For those of you who have been saying, you know, oh my God, 2022 is my year to get the handbook done, because I had planned to get it in place by January 1, 2022, and that didn't work out as well as I wanted. So I did want to go over some big changes in there, and so let's get started on those. Now it just went away. All right, there we go. Okay, what are the big updates on the leave laws? Well, there's been a couple, and one came in very late in the year, and that's primarily what we're going to go over today. Just for background purposes, you know, as you know, back in June, July of 2020, the legislature passed HFWA, the Healthy Families and Workplaces. Starting way back on January 1, 2021, those of you with 16 or more employees had to start complying. Other employees started January 1, 2022. There's two kinds of leave that we have to give under this. Do I have this said it right? Yeah. There's the sick leave, and I often, you know, when working with groups, when writing handbooks, it's always important to make sure you're distinguishing the sick leave from the second leave, frequently referred to as COVID leave, but more technically referred to as public health emergency leave. So if you really want to combine the acronyms together, we get HFWA PHEL. True story. So what's the sick leave? Well, we're all officially covered by this now. For the small employers who have not had to worry about it, we are now covered by it. What are those requirements? Well, really the way they set it up is one of two things I should have said, which is an accrual of 1 hour of leave for every 30 hours worked, or you can simply dump 48 hours into their sick leave bucket on their first day of employment on January 1st, you should, you know, whenever, you can certainly do a dump. You don't have to do, or just drop it in all 48. You don't have to do accrual, but you have to make sure your policy at least complies with 1 for every 30. It is every employee, part-time, full-time, regular, casual. They work for you 1 shift. They've accrued HFWA sick leave. From the first date of employment, make sure your policies, even though they may get them to the right number of 48 hours by the end of the year, you want to make sure that they're accruing from the start and that they can use it from the start. These are just some background. Here's a big change. I think I would say I didn't quite read this way. Man just looked at me like, what? Or maybe she has a question. She has a question?
Yeah, so this is probably a question that others have as well, just because there's been the 80 hours for COVID leave for that PHEL, and then there's this HFWA that's different.
Right.
And so the question is, we started in January of last year with this accrual. Do we have to redump those hours beginning of this year?
So on January 1, let's get to the bottom here. Let me get one quick thing on this, and then we'll get to that. You can cap leave used and a maximum accrued at 48 hours, not just for the year. And that means and we'll get into a question. So in a second, I think it's on the next slide. You can definitely, do I have that? Yes, we've got a hypo, so I'll get to that next. Oops. What is PHEL? Colorado PHEL is the 80 hours, well, we call it 80 hours, but it's really, for a better term, 2 weeks of paid leave for employees. Every Colorado employer, the Department of Labor, I think, is literal on this reading, they view it as we all made 80 hours available as of January 1, 2021. Small employers, you made 80 hours of leave or 2 weeks available also on January 1, 2021. So even though your employees don't get HFWA sick, small employers, till this year, they got HFWA FEL January 1, 2021. Do those leaves act together? Do they act? The statute discusses an offset, but the way the Department of Labor is reading it, which I think is right, the way the statute is read, or the way they're reading the statute is that 80 hours got dumped in or made available then. If you had leave that complied with HFWA at that point, you could use that HFWA leave as an offset. But, for example, if you didn't have HFWA leave, or you started HFWA leave January 1, 2021, or you didn't start it till January 1, 2022, but let's say for larger employers, you started to accrue that leave, and the employer started to accrue that leave in January, February, March of 2021. Does that thereby reduce the availability of HFWA public health emergency? The Department of Labor is taking the position, no, it does not. It is that 80 hours off by itself that covers HFWA FEL for COVID purposes. John?
So just for clarification,
Sure.
I don't know that we really said it, but the PHEL leave was put into place by Governor Polis as a public health emergency buffer for employees.
Right.
And that is it is different from HFWA. It's and for a different reason. HFWA is sick leave, or it's actually written more like PTO for any kind of sickness, not just COVID related.
Yeah, I would say that HFWA is both leaves. HFWA is both sick leave and FEL, but they are separate parts of the statute.
Right.
So when you talk about HFWA, you're talking really about both. It's like an exempt employee. You talk, well, it's salary and duty. So people who say salary are only getting half the equation. When you talk HFWA, you have to distinguish, are you talking HFWA sick or are you talking HFWA FEL?
Right.
Because those are different.
But the public emergency could end and PHEL will go away, but HFWA will stay.
Exactly.
Right. So we want to have a little bit of two separate conversations.
Right. The end, HFWA FEL, technically, as of right now, the Department of Human Services has Health and Human Services has it going through like January 20th.
Right.
Presumably, they will kick it for another 3 months, but if they don't, that would mean HFWA FEL ends February 20th, 2022.
Correct.
And
They're going to kick it, by the way.
But, yeah.
And the HFWA FEL, those 80 hours or those 2 weeks, that is once per public health emergency.
Yes.
And the HFWA sick is 48 hours every year.
Which can be taken.
Maybe.
Earned, carried over, and used. You can use up to 48 hours.
Yeah, we'll get to that question in a second, because it's not as much earned as I read the statute according to the Department of Labor every year, which is interesting. And that's one of the things we want to go over. So make sure you're kind of considering it that way. If you've got an employee who missed time for a sickness in 2021, I'm still challenging someone to come up with a non-physical workers' comp type injury. I injured my knee, I injured my shoulder, that isn't covered by HFWA FEL, because you get HFWA FEL as an employee every time you have symptoms. You got a headache, HFWA FEL. You got sniffles, HFWA FEL. You got bad stomach, HFWA FEL. You got bad stomach because of a shrimp, HFWA FEL. You got a headache because you got a hangover from watching the Super Bowl and want to take off the Monday afterwards, HFWA FEL, because headaches are a symptom of COVID. Well, yeah, but the employee tested for COVID and they're negative. The statute doesn't talk about the goal being the pandemic, but when you look at that fourth bucket of leave you can pull from, it specifically talks about the symptoms covered by the pandemic. So it could be much more expansive than just those with COVID. Here's the big update that I think you want to make sure employers are aware of going forward. This just got changed, which is, as we've talked about, you can limit usage of 48 hours per year, and you can limit accrual at 48 hours in total. So for example, let's say hypothetical employee Bob accrues 48 hours of sick leave by September of 2021. In late December, he uses 10 hours, which is what he ends the year at. Or I'm sorry, he uses 10 hours, so he's got right at the end. How much sick leave does Bob carry into 2022? He carries 38. He carries all that with him. If we fell off to the side, but let's pretend HIF was sick, Bob's carrying 22. How much leave can Bob accrue if he doesn't use any more in 2022? Under the law, yeah, it can be 10. The law talks about, and we'll get to it in a second, how the law is kind of confusing on this. But if Bob doesn't use any, you as an organization can limit him to 10 hours accrual, keeping that cap at 48.
Right.
What if he uses some? Well, keep in mind that, let's say Bob he accrued the HIF was sick of 48 hours by September 2021. Now he uses some in October. Does he accrue the rest of November and December of 2021? No, he's not required to, because he already accrued 48 hours of leave in 2021. He wouldn't have to start accruing leave until 2022, and you could, for example, dump the difference into Bob's bank of what he has versus 48. So keep track of that 48 can act as a forever cap. Is there a maximum that Bob can accrue? Yeah, he can accrue up to 48. You can set it higher. You can set it at 150 or
But it's in a rolling calendar year, January to December.
It's in a hard calendar year.
Right, that's
January
right.
to December.
Right, January 1 to December 31 is the accrual period and the usage measurement period.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I hear rolling, I immediately think FMLA.
Right, no, it's, so if they go into 2022 with 24, because they used 24 in 2021.
I was told there would be no math, but go ahead.
Right, so, and then they could use the other 24 that they had in their bucket, and they can accrue 48, cap at 48, and come to 2023 with 48 hours.
Yeah, let's pick different numbers, because when you do 24, you lose track of what the 20 is.
Oh, okay.
So we end 2021 with 20 hours.
Yes.
Bob can accrue in 2022 48 hours. He starts to accrue in 2022 X amount.
Right.
Now, if you do a dump accrual on January 1, then he only accrues the 48,
Right.
and he's capped.
Yep.
But if you do a 1 for 30, Bob keeps accruing up to 48. But if he then uses some, then he keeps accruing until it gets to 48.
48 for the year.
As a cap,
Right.
and 48 for the year.
To use.
Yes.
Right.
It's why I've been talking, as the Department of Labor came out with this just recently, I've been, counseling organizations to at least consider just doing the one-time yearly drop.
Unless they have a really smart system like we have that can handle all those accruals.
Yes. There you go. Where is this all coming from? Well, the Department of Labor states that the law does state that, it talks about can be used, except an employer is not required to use more than 48 in a year. The division also says, look, any accrued leave up to 48 hours carries forward for use in a later year, but an employer need not allow use or accrual of over 48 hours in any one benefit year. Yeah, the interesting thing about that is there's a flip side to it, is that Info 6B from the Department of Labor does say that an employee must accrue 1 for every 30 starting their first day of work, must receive 1 for every 30. Well, an employee who, like Bob, who's capped, who had used 10 hours, goes down to 38, then goes up to 48 and stops, doesn't technically accrue 48 hours or receive 48 hours during the year. So it's an interesting part of the law, but I will tell you, The way the DOL is applying it is you can cap at 48 both as a full cap, both as a full accrual, and both as a full, and also as a full usage. So, yes.
So do you have to carry over the extra hours, or can you start over with a new 48 hours at the beginning of each year?
Can you take them from 48 down to 0 and then start moving up? The only way, is that,
I guess I'm reading it as maybe they were given 48, they only used 8 last year.
yep.
Instead of carrying over the 40, everybody just starts fresh at 48?
You could do a
Yeah,
lump,
I mean-
you could do a lump sum of 48.
Yeah, substantively, it works the same way, but I would rather say, no, it's not that we ever took away below 48. You were at 40, we just gave you 8. That's exactly what the law would want. If you said, no, we reduced you to 0, and then dropped you up, moved you up to 48, substantively, isn't that the same thing?
Mhm.
Yeah, it is, but the DOL can be really persnickety on terms, so I never like to say, like, take away.
Right, just refilled it.
Just refilled it up to 48. I like refill.
Refill, sounds right.
So keep track of that 48. Can be a cap, it can be a maximum accrual, and it can be a usage as well, if you do go over 48.
Should we use sick time before COVID time if an employee has some available, if they're out for COVID and vice versa?
Yeah, that's a great question. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? And I would, the way I read the statute, the way I read the information from the Department of Labor, they like you drawing first from HFWA. Why? Because that, as John said, is going to go away sometime when the public emergency is over. HFWA sick is going to keep continuing. So the way I read their informational bulletins and the way I think the law reads this, tracks this, the first place you would pull a COVID reason is from HFWA. Then when that's gone, you can pull from HFWA sick. Don't pull HFWA sick, then pull HFWA.
And a recording of this webinar and the slides will be provided afterwards.
Because someone said Michael's going way too fast, and I can't possibly keep up. Okay, other updates as we go along through this. One of the questions we frequently get asked is, how do I pay? You know, it's easy for regular employees. You just pay them the number of hours that they were scheduled to work and those kind of things. But there are new information, or there is new information that just came out under the wage protection rule that discusses what happens if I got an employee with an indeterminate shift. I don't know how many hours I was supposed to pay them. What is it? This is that rule. So make sure you have that you keep track of that. If you've got on-call employees, this is how the rule works with respect to on-call employees. So the new wage protection rules identified those kind of persnickety ones out there in terms of, I don't even know what their shift is going to be, or what do I do with on-call? If you've got questions on how to pay HFWA, it is in these two under the new wage protection regulations. As we set up the talk, it's supposed to be about the new wage protection rules. Okay, a couple of things that have come out. Yeah, as I think I said, but the way the Department of Labor is applying it is that we all got our HFWA on January 1. I don't read it that way still. I still look at it like when the employee requests it. I know a lot of organizations are not using the offset possibility, but keep in mind it's January 1. So if you didn't do that and you have an employee who's been out a lot in 2021, this is that chance. Let's go back and figure out when they used PHEL, when they didn't. This is interesting for PHEL, and we frequently talk, documentation cannot be required to take HFWA. You can't say to an employee, Manon, I want you to prove that you're going out for COVID or going out for this. Employee says they got symptoms, Manon, I'm sorry to pick on you, Manon gets the leave. But they just came out and said you can require return to work documentation if you have a good faith belief that the employee was exposed. So I frequently get the question of, well, can we require Manon when she comes back to get a negative test. Yeah, if you have information that the employee had an exposure, maybe tested positive or something, that gives you the ability to request that. Now, if the person is home simply because their kid's school closed because of an outbreak, you don't have enough information. But you can request documentation on the way back in. And I know a lot of people read that like, no, you can't request. Yeah, but I want a negative test before I allow you back into the workplace. I thought John was turning for a question.
No.
Don't forget, and we'll get to this, this is the really big regulatory change that happened at the end of the year. HFWA is not paid out upon termination, doesn't have to be given at any point unless they use it, then it has to be. But in the interim, unless it's provided under your handbook, or your PTO policy pays it out upon termination, if you have a HFWA standalone policy, you do not have to pay it out upon termination. One of the other big issues they just announced is just something to keep you up at night, is that there is individual liability for HFWA violations. So in addition for Manon suing the organization, she could sue John directly because John made the decision to terminate her for using HFWA sick leave. Just wondering. Okay, I'm going to go through this really quickly. We've all seen, any questions on HFWA?
Well, and I'm curious about this one too. So the 48 hours, I know that Colorado now is requiring you to pay out PTO and vacation.
Don't jump ahead, but go ahead.
Do you have to pay out these 48 hours, or is that the only one that's exempt from payout upon termination?
That is a brilliant question that we will answer in about 2 slides. So give me a sec, because as we all know, there's the vacation pay case that came out in this year that basically says, hey, if you've got a vacation policy, you have to pay it out upon termination. You can't use it or lose it. You have to allow employees to carry it all over. Again, the case only discussed vacation. It didn't discuss PTO, didn't discuss combined leaves. It only discussed vacation. Department of Labor, though, got involved. We all know the decision, Supreme Court said yes. You cannot take away vacation and all these kinds of other things. Unaddressed issues became, what do we do with PTO policies that combine HFWA? What do we do with unlimited Apple-type policies that the employee doesn't actually accrue leave but takes off whenever they want to? Those were not addressed. That was until the end of the year, November, and then it just went into effect 12 days ago. That the Department of Labor now defines vacation leave as pay for leave, regardless of its label, and is used at the employee's discretion, except for those things like, I'm sorry to keep picking on your senior here. You have to give 30 days notice before you use your leave. You have to give 2 weeks before you take PTO. That's not. But if someone can just take leave for any reason, that leave needs to be paid upon termination, rather than a leave or you can't be taken away. So if you've got a bereavement policy, well, that requires someone in the immediate family to die. That's a qualifying event. If you've got a HFWA policy, well, that requires someone to be sick. If you've got a holiday policy, well, that requires a holiday to have happened. A birthday policy, that requires a birthday. So those qualifying events immediately make it not payable when they're separate, standing alone little policies. So the question becomes, under this, PTO policies that both have an element of leave that's at discretion and a policy and the same policy that says there is no discretion, it's condition required, those need to be paid out upon termination. So for those organizations that mush their HFWA policy under PTO, and I know how much John loves those policies because we've debated on those in the past. If you put your HFWA policy under the PTO, I don't think you can pull it out and say, hey, it's separate. Or, hey, when we terminate, we're going to only pay you half because half's vacation and half is HFWA. I'm not sure that's an option anymore. The policy, the way the language reads is very broad. It's any policy that has an element of leave that doesn't require conditions. And so because of that, doesn't mean employers need to pay out PTO if it identifies it also includes HFWA. I mean, I think the short answer is I certainly think there is a very strong argument that that needs to be paid out. Is that a lawsuit for a future day like the vacation pay case was? Yeah, unfortunately it is. You don't want to be in that lawsuit. I can tell you that from experience. So yeah, one idea is, of course, now to pull out the HFWA sick and to pull out HFWA public emergency. I'd be concerned, for example, if my PTO policy, I don't know if people can see me as I do an umbrella, if you have a PTO policy
I
that's
thought
got,
you were doing the YMCA.
I was. If you've got a PTO policy that does vacation, does HFWA sick, and does HFWA public emergency, yeah, I get, it's clear, you don't pay HFWA sick or HFWA public emergency upon termination, but if they're under your umbrella of a PTO, yeah, I'll tell you, it provides an employee a lot more of a foothold to do that. So I would definitely recommend pulling out the public emergency, no question about it. You can still have a PTO if you want, just be cognizant that you may be paying all that out upon termination, which of course you were probably doing anyways if you had a PTO policy, but just keep in mind, taking away, now bad.
This is an interesting.
So because, give me one.
Sorry.
So if you, for example, say, well, we're gonna reduce your PTO down to 48, because that's what HFWA requires. If it's an umbrella PTO that has vacation and HFWA sick, you may not be able to do that because it now is a policy with without conditions, and that may not be able to be reduced. Yes, man.
All right, so what if there is a vesting period for your PTO? The employee earns from day one, but isn't vested to utilize it until so many days. Would PTO be required to pay out if that employee separates before they reach that day?
So I'm going to assume under this policy that it's not also a HFWA policy, because of course, HFWA can't have vesting.
Right.
You would need to move that out. So assuming you had a more traditional vacation leave, can you have a vacation leave policy that doesn't vest? I would say the answer to that is yes, but I would also make it very clear in the policy. I don't like, I mean, what I would do in the policy to take away all things is I wouldn't say to the employee, hey, you're gonna accrue 1 day for every pay period, but you don't vest in that until your 90th day. I think you have a really strong argument, but I also think it's potential litigation. I think the better way to do it is say to the employee, on your 90th day, we're gonna drop 3 days into your bank.
Right.
Then from there forward, you'll accrue. That way, there's no question they're not accruing during the first 90 days. It's being, it takes you X number of 90 days, 120 days to be able to say, these are mine. That, until then, if you allow them to accrue, but they don't vest, yes, that does track what Nieto in the Supreme Court decision said. I just think it works so much easier if you just simply say, you don't accrue it till the 90th day, and then we're gonna give you 4.
In this discussion, this is our, you and I have gone around this discussion on the HFWA leave, is we've been recommending to our clients that you have a separate leave that is called Colorado HFWA leave in your policy and just match the state regs on it. So you can point at that and say, our sick leave is the state policy, and that's how it's administered. And the same thing with PHEL, that you have a separate policy that's administered separately.
Yeah.
And if you have a good accrual engine in your software, you can manage those. If you're on something like QuickBooks, it's really hard because they don't have the accrual. And that's why people are talking about lump summing, because they don't have an accrual engine that can handle the give and take of the capping and the reaccruing based on usage.
Yeah, the only hard part I hear in response to that from small employers in particular is, well, look, I already give 80 hours.
Right.
Now, which I had as PTO.
Yeah.
If I make a separate HFWA sick leave policy, now I've just given everybody 128, and it's such a low bar that I know people are gonna use it.
Right.
So here's what I'll do. I'll knock down their vacation leave by 48 hours,
Give it to them.
and no one will complain. That is so not gonna happen.
Right.
The moment you take vacation away, I don't care if you tell them there's another bucket available, there's still gonna be the storming of the castle. So it is a problem because you're suddenly, and on top of the 80, so now we got another 80 plus 48, plus whatever I used to give for vacation, like, how do I deal with all of these? That's what I hear usually is the pushback. The rest period has not changed. What the DOL clarified, though, is they're really serious about 10 minutes. If you look at that the new comps order, which came out 12 days ago, and it barely made 2022, by the way. They could have given us a little more time on the poster, in case they're listening. That it is, make sure they're getting the full rest period, not 6. I mean, you can have a policy that says, you know, we're gonna do 5, but you have to get a heads up on that. But make sure they're getting that full 10, that paying partial is just not good enough. So if you say like, hey, you got 4, so I'm only paying for 6, the DOL has been, in their comps, has been very clear, nope, it's the full thing. So make sure you're doing that.
So what kind of records should an employer have on that? On the rest period?
Yeah. Good, that's a great question. The way the law reads is authorized and permitted. It doesn't say they have to take it, they have to be authorized
So
and permitted.
posted, encouraged, part of your handbook.
I'd love if you had an employee wage record that they signed off on every week,
Yeah.
that at the end said,
I've taken my rest
I,
period.
not taken, I understand that I was authorized and permitted to take the required number of rest days. That would be wonderful. I don't know if everyone's system can do that, but that'd be cool. We've talked in the past about records retention. We used to say 3 years because of various different things. New regulations, new cases have just come out that talk about 6 years. So if you're keeping wage records, make sure you're keeping them for 6 years, not just 3. Make sure you're going back at least that period of time for all wage records. This has seen a spike in wage filings because employees are now claiming, hey, remember when I left 4 years ago? Well, I want those wage records, or I want time for unworked time or unpaid time, because it's now a 6-year statute of limitations instead of a 3.
So what
Or that's what it looks like.
So what if you shredded yours up to 3 and now you can't magically reproduce those?
So, yeah,
I mean, really?
as I frequently joke, I'm a really good attorney, but I can't go back in time. You got what you got, but it's gonna be it could be a tough if there's a claim.
Right.
Couple of new things, the CDLE updates, we are now at $12.56 for minimum wage. We are now at $45,000 a year for the salary basis. That's going up every year, so keep track of that coming. Yeah, I was talking about this. The new court case basically said employees get to sue for unpaid rest breaks, and you may say, well, that's okay, it only goes back to when the law came in March of 2020. No, the way this court read it was that, no, it's always been the case, so an employee can go back for 6 years. Just something to keep in mind to keep you up at night. If you're going to take the position in your organization that it's just impossible for them, impractical for them to take a lunch, you're gonna need to establish that impracticality at litigation. So make sure that you're just not saying it is. It really, really is. So just something to keep in mind moving forward. A lot of updates. One of the ones that I know Manon and I put in the agenda was we wanted to go over the new gender identity, gender expression. There has been a change, there was a change in 2021. So if you have this, if you have gender expression, or if you have sex or sexual orientation defined in your handbook, make sure you now include the definitions of gender expression and gender identity in those handbooks. and I have them, and managers send you them for your material, for your handbooks. Make sure that you're including those in to the policy. If you're gonna define age, if you're gonna define sex, if you're gonna define race, if you're gonna define race and age, race which now includes hair, you want to make sure that you're defining these equally as well. We know all that. Oh, just to keep you posted, I hear all the time from people, well, there's no way that they're gonna go through with this Proposition 118 leave because, you know, we got HFWA now, and no, they're going. In fact, I went to a talk about 6 weeks ago with the Department of Labor, where they got up and explained that they received $1.5 million from the state general fund. They are starting this whole process. They're still working on the rules, but they're confident that they will have everything in place by the end of this year when we start taking deductions next year. I will tell you, there's a lawsuit pending that has asked that this all be thrown out because that they view what they're doing with us as a tax. I'm not a tax attorney, nor am I gonna play one on TV, but that lawsuit is proceeding its way to see what the courts do with it in terms of is it a tax or not. But as of right now, the DOL is all hands on deck with this Prop 118 leave, which the premiums start in a year. The scariest thing I heard at the talk that I was at is the Department of Labor person said, what we're going to do is we're going to get all of our information from the employee, you know, reasons for leave, you know, what employer you work for, how much do you earn from that employer. The only thing we're gonna ask the employer to confirm is, does the employee work for your organization or not? That's all they're going to ask. They're not gonna ask, can you confirm wages? Can you confirm, do you know of this sickness? The only thing they're asking the employer for at this point, their belief is that, does the employee work for you? So, kind of limited information. In the, question?
No.
Okay, in the time left, I did wanna go over this. Hey, you may have heard there's COVID and there's a Supreme Court case and all these kinds of things. In addition to that, before we get into the new case, CDC did put out new guidelines. If you haven't seen them, these are them. Make sure you're implementing your guidelines, particularly with respect to, you know, we've seen so many more cases these days because of Omicron. And so make sure that going forward, you're complying to new CDC quarantines when people have to quarantine, when people can come back. OSHA has also been very helpful in what do we do if we have a client who was exposed or if we have an employee who was exposed. They've got standards in place. These standards have not been challenged. So if you've got someone who was in close contact, 6 feet for a period of 15 or more minutes in a 24-hour period, that is something OSHA's recommending that you notify the people. Hey, you had close contact, and they were even so helpful as to give you an email of what they recommend saying to people. So you can send it out saying, we've been notified that an individual who was present, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to identify the individual, but there's the email you can send out to anyone who was in close contact with your individuals.
So clarification on that,
Sure.
It says you don't have to identify the individual, but obviously that's very relevant to exposure. But it's breach of privacy?
Yeah,
So COVID privacy, that's just out the window.
yeah, COVID privacy is a lot lower than other kinds of privacy is what I would say. But OSHA, I think their goal is that you've made that call. So for example, the three of us are sitting in this room, certainly within 6 feet, for more than 15 minutes. You send me an email, you wouldn't have to identify John tested positive or Manny
Right.
tested positive.
One of us did.
You could just say, an employee who was present in our workforce, who you had close contact with, is tested positive. I'm gonna go through these quickly because I do want to get, you all know this, President Biden, back on September 9th, requested or directed OSHA to develop a plan. CDPHE had done it sooner, the CMS had done it around the same time. What happened? Well, everybody sued. And as we all recall, the Fifth Circuit, which covers Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, issued an opinion that said, hey, there's an injunction in place, OSHA, you do nothing. About a week later, they upped that and said, no, you really do nothing. And so we were in an injunction, where there was an injunction in place that prevented those standards from going into existence. There were other similar lawsuits filed in basically every circuit. One of the things I always find fascinating about this process is that when there's a whole bunch of federal lawsuits all going out at the same time, it used to be, and by used to be, I mean before 1989, which is why, I was in law school then, so I should have known about it. Who knew? But it used to be the first of the court got to the first of the Supreme Court. Well, they changed that rule. And now what happens is they put a whole bunch of balls in a big drum, and they reach into the drum and they pull out the winner of the who's going to handle this issue, and the winner in this case was the Sixth Circuit. As we've all known by now, they were it's fairly conservative. They had 11 conservatives, 5 liberals on their bench, 11 appointed by Trump and Bush, and 5 appointed by Clinton and Obama. Despite that, the group all took a vote and said, should we do it as a group, or should we do it as a little itty division do it? Well, they tied 8-8, and which means 3 conservative justices voted to have a small division of 3 issued this opinion as opposed to the whole group. 2 days later, that panel came out, and by 2-1, they lifted the stay. So that means OSHA's emergency temporary standards went into effect. There is no longer an injunction. It is currently in effect. Around this same time, the courts were all over the White House asked the Supreme Court, hey, we got this CMS one, which is also doesn't deal with 100 employees, but it's for every organization that receives Medicare or Medicaid services or funding. We've got this requirement for them on immunizations as well. Supreme Court addressed that one. Supreme Court, as you may have heard, the oral arguments took place on January 7th. What has the court done in the past? Well, in the past couple of months, they have been very supportive of immunization cases that have come to them. And in fact, in one case, they said, no, you don't need to do religious exemptions. In another case, they said, no, we don't care if you lost your job. We are not going to put an injunction in place. And way back in 1905, they allowed Massachusetts to require all their citizens to get the smallpox. One thing I would note of all those cases is they're all state cases. As we know from the current Supreme Court recent holdings, they like states' rights. They're not as good with liking federal rights. So I've been asked, and I will actually, if anyone wants to take a lunch bet on this, my bet is that they do not put an injunction in place for the CMS guidelines, but they do put an injunction in place 5-4 for the 100 employee. That said,
and the acronym CMS.
Center for Medicaid and Medicare and Medicaid Services, or Medicaid. Okay. That's 2 M's, but.
So anyone who received funding from Medicare or Medicaid had to comply? Has to
comply.
Right, with vaccination?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I think will happen when the Supreme Court issues a decision. There are many opining that decision will come out tomorrow, because the Supreme Court announced, hey, we're going to issue a decision on Thursday. They decided to announce, and everyone's like, ooh, what decision? Well, we don't have to tell you. Maybe it's a lot of things. But this is not a typical decision time. That's next Wednesday. This is an unusual decision time, so a lot of people are opining that it will be tomorrow. That said, you cannot tell OSHA, I didn't comply with the ETS, which went into effect 3 days ago, because Michael Santo said the Supreme Court is probably going to grant an injunction. You cannot do that. I saw SHRM had an article come out yesterday. Something like 56% of employers are saying, we're going to wait to see what the Supreme Court does before we comply. Technically, that is not lawful. Just like you have to go 75 on the highway, even though you may not get pulled over for going 76, your requirements that we're going to talk about in a second, those went into effect January 10th, 2022. That's not the immunization, that's not the testing. Those don't go into effect until February 9th. But pretty much all the other requirements, such as determining the vaccination status of every employee and developing a written plan, if you have 100 or more employees, those went into effect 3 days ago. So I know what you're saying, which is, oh, come on, Michael, it's tomorrow. Yes, I agree, it's tomorrow, but technically it went into effect yesterday. So, not that I would ever drive over 5 on the highway. I always stay under. So, ooh, there's a typo there I just noticed. What did we do? Because I know we all did it by January 10th. You have to have a policy. The policy has to discuss exemptions. You have to determine the vaccination status of every employee by January 10th, including getting acceptable proof and maintaining a list. You have to have those records of that status.
So question on the vaccination piece. Is there any language, as far as you know, on this for people who have not been vaccinated but have recently recovered from COVID?
They do not make an exception for antibodies. They just decided it was going to be too difficult to do that, so they're going simply based on vaccination status.
Shoot them up.
Yeah, either you're vaccinated or you're not, and there are separate rules for those who aren't vaccinated and as opposed to those who are under the OSHA rules. Right. One of the things I think we're going to have a problem with.
And we're just now talking about employers with over 100.
Yes. I had opined, for those who've seen me speak in the past, I had opined it would be really easy to just delete over 100 and put 75 in a couple of months, and then put 50, and then put 25. I'm withdrawing that opinion. When the OSHA came out with their ETS, they made it very clear, small organizations just don't have the wherewithal to comply with this. So I think they've given up their ability to, did the Supreme Court just rule? Is that what you're looking at?
No,
Okay.
I got an interesting question about the booster shot. Do you also have to have records on every booster shot?
No. When OSHA came out with their ETS, the booster shot was not as, in their mind, firm. I'm not making a medical opinion, I'm just telling you what OSHA did. Not as firm in their mind as a requirement. It's still up in the air, so they did not address the booster shot. It is simply the 2 shots for Pfizer and Moderna, the 1 shot for J&J.
Okay.
Good question. Yes, we are just talking about the OSHA 100, but keep in mind, those of you who have less than that but are covered by CMS, Medicare, Medicaid, those kind of things, you also have the case at the Supreme Court right now, and they will issue that decision in the near future. I was really hoping it'd be Monday, but they didn't know what Michael's hopes were.
What is the guidance provided when an employee refuses to disclose?
So that's a really, unfortunately, refusal to disclose acts these days like I refuse to give you my authorization to work in the United States. The immunization status is something employers are required to know for each of their employees. Now, the other question I get that's similar to that is, why are there all these discussions regarding what to do for an exemption, religious or medical? Why don't we just have them go test? Because it's either get vaccinated, have an exemption, but if they have an exemption, they have to act just like those who haven't gotten vaccinated. They have to wear a mask, stay 6 feet away, do all the things. why don't we just forget the whole exemption process and say, yeah, if you're not gonna get vaccinated, you can test. Yes, substantively, that seems to be the same thing, we don't have to worry about that, but OSHA wants an exemption process in your policy. So make sure you're identifying that, and so, you know, keep track, if you're over 100, it's basically, you know, I have a lot of information in here about how you get to 100, but in essence, count everybody under your umbrella. If you've got off-site workers, if you've got part-time, full-time, whatever, temporaries, PRN, they're counting. If you've got kiosks around the state or around the county, they all count as one. So whatever, you know, you want, look at that payroll, and if your payroll has 100 people on it, you're covered.
Okay, what about common ownership?
Common ownership, yeah, is a great question. Department of Labor standards in particular are trying to mush us all together.
Right.
They want everyone as one happy employer. And so if you've got common ownership that also has common administration. Right. And common wage, and you have common, you share employees back and forth.
Well, even if you don't, I mean, common ownership for 401K, common ownership for ACA, common ownership for overtime. Doesn't matter if you own a Taco Bell and a hardware store, if it's a husband and wife and they share employees, you still gotta track overtime.
Yep.
So I can't
If you gotta track overtime for those employees,
Yeah.
you gotta count them as under the
I
100.
would think so, yeah.
No, I don't think there's a question.
Yeah.
But our part-time employees counted, our full independent contractors, at-home workers, yes, no, yes.
Okay, wait a second here.
You do have to count part-time. You don't have to count independent contractors.
Head count for W-2s.
Head count for W-2, sure, let's go with that.
Yeah.
Municipalities, do they have to comply with the 100 employee count?
I have not, ooh, that's a really good question.
These
I would, yeah, I mean, that would be my first reaction, but, we will issue in the next couple of days a newsletter. We're doing, by the way, for those who aren't getting newsletters or you are getting your newsletters, you may have noticed they're coming out much more frequently, but they're much smaller. Because frankly, the world ain't waiting for me to get to another quarter. So we've decided we're gonna issue much shorter, much more frequent newsletters, so that's, and we will issue one in the municipality one, because my brain works perfectly and then just stopped working.
Is there an email people can email and request to be on the newsletter?
Yeah.
I'll provide a link when
yeah,
we send out
very
the
good.
slides and the recording.
Okay. Because I'm gonna say, it's a great newsletter. If you're not on it, get it. It's very insightful, and I've never found one that wasn't worth reading.
Oh, thanks. These are the exemption issues. Just a couple of the questions I seem to get a lot of, which is, okay, I get the testing thing, does over-the-counter count? Over-the-counter counts, but it has to be proctored. It can't just be an employee telling you, hey, I did it, here it is. Nope. You gotta have some kind of proctoring. Either the employer has to proctor it, or it has to be proctored by some kind of third party. Don't forget, as they're going off to the county, and this is not on the information on the slide, I'm just kind of going over those things with a couple of minutes left. Don't forget, as they're going off to the county, they are on the clock. So if you have them do it on a Saturday, that counts as time worked. Traveling to the site, from the site, may be time worked as well. So make sure you're keeping track that the time spent waiting in line, the time spent getting there, may all be considered time worked.
So this would also count for like the daily testing requirement that you might impose on someone?
Yes. You have people show up 10 minutes early, because you've got a plethora of quick tests, that 10 minutes counts. You do not have to pay for the medical examinations, unless, and particularly right now, the county is making them free, but if it comes a day, I don't think there will, because the administration did release a whole bunch of money to make sure the counties have plenty of tests. But if it ever comes to then yes, we cannot make employees pay for those tests. As long as it's free, we don't have to make. Now, an employee comes in and says, hey, I bought one of these tests at Walgreens, you have to pay. No, because there's a free county test, and you could have gone to get that. I'm not paying you for that test. Don't forget time worked under comps is very, very small threshold.
Is there anything that would say you cannot provide rapid tests to your employees? You as an employer just have a stock of them?
Yeah, if you as an employer have a stock of them, I would get on eBay, because those things are in short supply. So, no, there's nothing that says you can't. Don't forget, not eBay, Craigslist, whatever. Don't forget that to use those, they need to be proctored. Someone needs to be there, in all those things, so.
So would a proctor be like, somebody else at the place of employment witnesses that you had your test result and signs off on it?
Yep.
So it could be another employee that
Yep.
is authorized to do that?
Yep.
Okay.
Anybody but, like, well, my kids saw me do it.
Right.
And Mannon's gonna provide all these, slides, so you'll be able to get, if you're saying, oh my God, he's flipping so quickly, you're gonna get the whole docket of slides, you'll be saying. If you're thinking, oh, Michael's right, I really should not wait till tomorrow, because I have to say that, I'm not gonna wait till tomorrow for the Supreme Court decision. OSHA's got a template online that gives you what its template is for the mandatory vaccination policy. I will tell you, it's 7 pages long. I think it's a little longer than it needs to be, but it is a nice jumping off point or starting point.
So do we have time for one more question?
We do.
Okay. The OSHA template says employees may request an accommodation, cannot be vaccinated and or wear a face covering. So, I guess it's kind of a.
Yeah, to glean the question, can an employee make a request from not only the immunization, but a request for the mask and a request for other things? I don't want to stand 6 foot or whatever. Yeah, if an employee can make a medical exemption request and a religious exemption request from any requirement. Now, then the question becomes, even if they have a religion that says, or a medical, that says, I can't take the immunization, I can't wear a mask, I can't do these other things, that only is one step in the exemption process. The second step becomes, can the organization reasonably accommodate it? So for an example, if an employee says, I have a religion against wearing masks. Aware of one, but let's pretend there is one. I have a religious exemption against wearing masks. The organization can say, okay, I believe, Mannon, that you have that religious belief. But in this organization, I can't accommodate it. Because I need you to wear a mask. And so you either have to wear a mask, or we're looking at remote, or we may not be able to employ you. Because even though an employee has a sincerely held belief, or a medical exemption regarding some religious requirement, there's still the accommodation element in the analysis. Don't forget, it's a 2-step analysis. You may have seen all the publications like, oh, this hospital denied a sincerely held religious belief. That's probably not what happened. What probably happened is the organization said, you may have a sincerely held religious belief, but also the problem is we can't accommodate you. We think it's a direct threat to our patients, to our employees, if you don't wear a mask, so there's no way we can accommodate you.
And while you're talking like the 6-foot rule, you could say, I'm hard of hearing.
I can't stay 6 feet apart. And then the employer can say, well, if you can't stay 6 feet apart, then you're either calling in for every meeting, or we're gonna have to move you remote, or we may not be able to employ you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget, just because the employee meets the medical exemption or the religious does not mean you have to grant it. There's a second step. And the slides talk about that in our materials that Mannon's gonna send out, and I'm officially over by 2 minutes. Thank you very much. I bet, Matt, I think it's coming out tomorrow. So, I can't believe it'll be quiet. I'm sure at least my Apple News feed will be going off like crazy.
Yeah, I'm gonna say sign up for that newsletter with Michael, and then when there's updates, he's pretty good about getting those out in a reasonably timely manner, and, they've been a great resource for us. And he doesn't charge for them. It's awesome.
I think what I'll be doing tomorrow is just injunction in place, or injunction not in place, so there will be a really quick once we see it,
Yep.
on the off chance no one else does. So,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Did you send up?
Yeah, I'll send
Send up
everything
the
out.
show? Great, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay healthy.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had a number of clients come to us specifically